Wonderful. I'll stand for a second. Thank you, Dr. Barros, for that introduction. While our panel gets set up with mics and all sorts of technology, I'll introduce myself. My name is Magnus Franklin, as Dr. Barros mentioned. I'm a journalist in Brussels since about 8 years. I've been writing about these people for about all that time, and indeed Dr. Barros and Mr. Viola and everything that we've been discussing. And I think it's nice to be back in Lisbon, because I came last time in 2010 for the Fibre to the Home Council conference, and there was a big, I think it was called an aspirational conference about showing people how Portugal could transform in 2010 into a digital society. And when we left, people went, yeah, that was nice, that chance. And here we are, 6 years later, and I think the numbers speak for themselves. Portugal is in the forefront. And actually, I picked up, I don't know if you've been flying recently, but I picked up this from TAP coming in. And it's a whole issue dedicated to digital in Portugal. And not just the usual winemaking and beaches and so on. I mean, it's about biotech, it's about also, I mean, this is impressive. So I think a big hand to Portugal for pulling it off, and all of you who made it happen. So that was a kind of my way of introducing the theme, which is more European in scope, but also thanking the host for having us here. So without further ado, you're not here to hear from me, obviously. We have a brilliant panel. And to start us off, we'll have some initial perspectives to discuss Mr. Viola's proposal, and I think we'll have a lively debate about some of the details of the big picture that we just heard. And I think with usual aplomb, we'll start with the European Parliament, because I think they deserve to be heard first. And Pilar del Castillo Vera is well known. She's the mother of European telecoms rules, I guess you could say, and BEREC, and roaming, and everything else that we love about the sector. So I can't imagine someone better placed to talk about this. We have Sebastián Soriano, who is the chairman of BEREC, as we already heard, who has a perspective also from France about these issues. We have Alexandre Destriel, one of the I think, best known and loved academics in the field of telecoms in Europe, and Tony Shorthall, who's also somewhat an institutional memory on this subject, has been involved in the commission and now a consultant, but knows more about telecoms than mostly anyone I know. So I think we have a wonderful panel. We'll start off with Pilar. Do you want to give us a short introduction about what you think about the code?
Okay, well, after the intervention of course, well, thank you very much to Fatima and ANACOM for giving me the possibility to be here today, and this opportunity to reflect in front of you. After what Roberto Viola mostly have explained, it's difficult to add. He's the father of this code, so I still cannot compete with him. Well, he knows extremely well. So this is, something to say when I start, but then at the same time I cannot still tell you about the position of Parliament, because the process in Parliament has still not started in some way. The parliamentary rapporteur, which I have the honor to deserve in that position this time, was appointed last week, so the procedure will start now. But since this is something that we have been debated in one way or another for a long, long time, I like to make some reflections related to what Fatima or Roberto or even the minister or the one that raised on question has expressed. Let me start with connectivity in these days. And when we think in connectivity today in the context of the digital world and importance, we cannot think about this in a different manner that connectivity has represented. If we go back and see that any jump that modern humanity has developed, it is very much linked to connectivity. Connectivity immediately appears in any development that brings humanity from one step to other. Now we are in extremely, important period of connectivity, because digital connectivity will bring us to a new, absolutely new dimension. And in that sense, now the situation has changed so much. If we look back to 5 years ago, 8 years ago, when we debated the last telecom package in 2009, this was absolutely out of the scope to debate in the way we are debating now. Roberto has mentioned in terms of how attractive could be the investments we need for connectivity. Well, in a number of industries link extremely to the connectivity that telecom sector can provide. And he mentioned the more iconic one, which is the car industry. You know that the car, driverless cars has become a kind of connected cars, became a mantra, every time we are talking about this. But think in any field. Think in the health sector. Think in the research sector. Think in the educational sector. Think in the energy sector, in terms of production, in terms of distribution, in terms of consumption. Connectivity is also crucial. So the room for arguments, in order to invest in the deployment of the network we need is so wide that it's difficult that someone cannot find, the interesting to invest in that. In any case, I think there is another aspect which immediately the possible investors, they ask you, which is, okay, this is perfect, but now how this particular proposal, legislation, facilitates, promotes what is new, because we know that, we know better than you that this is very important for the car industry, for the energy industry, for whatever industry it is, or service, not only industries in a more proper sense, but think in the financial services, how important is also connectivity. But what is new in this proposal? And, well, this is one of the exercises I had to, try to do in order to say, okay, then what is new compared to the last one, it is this and this and this and this. I would, in general terms, as a summary, I can, in this preliminary, let's say, first glance, in which I am just dealing now with the code, because we have not yet started, it is, well, we can say that it is more proportional, that it is more flexible, and that gives more legal certainty. And having said that, in terms of the general, let's say, definition, we can find different specific aspects which are linked to this. First, that one of the important changes is that it adds the promotion of investment as one of the principles of the framework. It is at the core of the framework. And previously to that, before to that, it was only two principles, competition and consumer well-being. Still they are there, but there is a new principle which has been incorporated, and this gives an idea of to what extent the rest, the content, goes in that direction as well. Let me just say some of the other aspects, concrete ones, that reflect this principle of promotion of investment. We can say that it is in the proposal, the proportionality requirements for the imposition of access regulation has been in some way reduced, are more simple. The draft proposal that we know now explicitly provides that wholesale access regulation can be imposed on significant market operators only when and where necessary to address retail market failures. For example, Or, for example, when considering access remedies, NRAs are required to first consider mandating access to civil engineering, such as ducts and poles, and to impose other access remedies only if they conclude that access to civil engineering alone will not be sufficient to achieve the objectives of the regulatory framework. I must say that this has worked very well in Spain and in Portugal and in Ireland, in which the deployment of fiber is now the 3 countries are at the top of the European countries. These are concrete examples, which is important because one is the general argument, well, because everything is needed. I mean, every industry needs this, it's horizontal, but this is a specific measures, treatments of problems that are new in this proposal compared to other one. The second one is spectrum. Spectrum is something that always is there, and always there is not the possibility to find a solution in terms of better coordination. Roberto Viola has explained very well why that better coordination is needed. And doesn't mean, that the member states, they are going to lose in terms of this national resource and or even the return they get for the auction and so on and so forth. But in terms of a digital single market, which is what we are talking about, such a coordination is needed. Such a coordination gives more certainty. Such a coordination gives more security that your investments can work better. Being in a country in which you don't have big players and then you have local players, or in a country that you have more semi-pan-European ones, which is, well, some countries, they have some companies which you can consider like that, and it's absolutely, in that sense, necessary. It's not asking so much. This is, in the context of the 5G deployment, in the context of all the needs we have for the digital technologies that provide with the possibility for all these industries really be extremely competitive at a global level and being the European economy as well. That's extremely necessary for cloud computing, for big data, for the technology developing, Internet of Things, and so on and so forth. This is something that should be one of the main, in my view, achievements for this new proposal, for this new code for electronic communication in Europe. So I hope this time we have the possibility to get Parliament and Council and the Commission an agreement on that. It's not going to be easy, but I think this is a key point for this dossier. And let me say something about BEREC. Roberto Viola said BEREC was a step forward compared to the very beginning, kind of lousy, not very much coordinated situation of the NRAs before 2009. BEREC was born, indeed was an idea that born in Parliament as an alternative to the Commission proposal at that time. What it was an agency, with very centralized agency, with all the competences, and so it was not easy to get an agreement, not with the Council, but with the Commission at that time. But BEREC is there. There is no doubt that BEREC has get a lot of legitimacy. It's very, really it has, say, the vision, the opinion that in general terms, different stakeholders, members of the European Parliament and others, they have from BEREC is really good. The opinion is really good. BEREC has helped to a situation like not only roaming, but guidelines in neutrality and many other aspects. So I think in this occasion we have to debate on that. Maybe some aspect can be retuned because, from time to time you have to come back and see how things are going on. But I must say that the BEREC story is a story of success that is easy to show, to demonstrate. So I end here. We start now in Parliament. I hope something very important, it is that this process must be really fast. We cannot spend 2 years or 3 years debating on this. This is something that digital society, gigabytes, more or less, will not wait for, and that will be, something useful as much as we can deliver on time. So, thank you.
Thank you, Pilar, and I'm sure that's music to Roberto's ears to hear such a ringing endorsement 3 days after being appointed. Thank you, Pilar, and congratulations, by the way, on your appointment. Mr. Soriano, you have some initial thoughts, I'm sure, on this proposal.
Yes, first of all, thank you to ANACOM for inviting me, and thank you to Roberto Viola for its kind words. I'm happy to be here, but actually I cannot give you a formal position considering the code, the proposal regarding BEREC, because the BEREC is a body of 28 regulators, and we are still working on the proposal from the Commission, and we are in a process to issue an opinion, hopefully at the end of the year. That will be a partial, no, this is not, I will go to this later, which is not, which will be not a complete opinion, because the code is, the proposal from the Commission is very broad, so we will have a first opinion before the end of the year, focused on several issues, which are regulating access, the institutional setup of the BEREC, and the question of OTT regulation, over-the-top regulation. And we will work on other issues like spectrum, end-user, universal service in a second step, hopefully. So today I just can share with you 2 experiences. The first one deals with what is the Gigabit Society, because I really appreciate the name of the conference, New Regulation for a Gigabit Society. First of all, what is a Gigabit Society? And actually, we speak much of fixed networks. And this is very important for SMEs. This is very important to have very fast broadband for households and so forth. But let me tell you that when I go in rural areas in France, they don't mention fixed connectivity. But they are very, very much upset about mobile connectivity. And I think that it is a great achievement from the Commission to extend the connectivity objectives in its proposal. Previously, connectivity objectives were only focused on fixed network. So you had a digital agenda with objective of connectivity in 2020, 30 megabytes per second and 100 megabytes per second for households. This is very important. But when you ask to people, when you ask to your relatives, when you ask to people that live in suburbs or in rural area, what they really care about is mobile. And so for the first time, with this proposal, we could have the opportunity to take care also of this mobile connectivity. And I think that with more and more converging fixed and mobile markets, not only at the retail level, for instance, in France we have this quadruple play. I think in Portugal you call this fifth play, but well, it's the same thing. And this convergence takes place not only at the retail level, at the commercial level, but also at the network level. Because with the 4G and with 5G, even more networks, you have to bring the fiber to the antenna. So if you roll out an NGA network for fixed purpose, then you can also use it for mobile purpose. So this fixed and mobile convergence is something very, very strong all over Europe. And it was really a pity that the present framework cannot take care of mobile objectives. I think this is something very important. The second experience I wanted to share with you, and it's related to the slide I wanted to show you, if we can go back to this slide, is about the new regulation, because the name of the conference deals with new regulation. And to be honest, when I look at the proposal from the Commission sometimes, I have the impression that new regulation is less regulation. And I think the picture is a little bit more complex. And actually what I am considering, not only in France, but also all over Europe and also all over the world, is that all telecom regulators are more and more using new regulatory tools thanks to data, thanks to information. More and more regulators are considering to put information on the table to incentivize operators. For instance, for incentivize operators to invest in networks. Why information is so important? Today in France, and I think it's the same thing in Portugal, if you want to purchase the cheaper offer for a 4G service, it's very easy to find it. You have many online services that compare the various offers and that give you the information about some special offer made by such operator at such time. But if you want to choose your network, not only because it's the cheaper one, but maybe also because it's the best quality, or maybe it's the best coverage, then it's difficult. It's difficult because this information is complex. And sometimes this information is not disclosed by mobile operators. So at BEREC level, we decided next year to have a common position between all national regulatory authorities about how to monitor mobile coverage rollout. And I wanted to share with you in 2 words what we are trying to do in France. We call this new approach regulating with data. This is not an expression from ARCEP, actually it's an expression from Nick Grossman, who is a co-founder of Square Union venture in the US, that consider that all regulators in any fields have not only to have a classical approach with authorizations and fines, but also to regulate with data, with information. And so what we are trying to do in France is to publish more accurate and more relevant information regarding telecom operators. This information can come from operators. We call this unbundling of data. We don't unbundle the networks, we unbundle the data from the operator. Unbundling of the data, we use crowdsourcing and partnership with crowdsourcing application, and we can also use signaling platforms where a customer can signal their problems. So this is a broad strategy to gather the maximum of information in a first step, and then to deliver part of all this information on open data to consumers. And what we hope, thanks to this, is that tomorrow, hopefully next year, we will have in France services, online services that compare operators in terms of coverage and quality. Imagine that you could fill a form where you signal your address, where you're living, where you're working, the bus number you're traveling with, or the highway, or the subway, or the train. You give this information, and thanks to the information on open data, the service can tell you what is the best operator for you in terms of coverage and quality. Maybe that could change the way you choose your operator, not only on prices, but also on quality and coverage. And thanks to that, we hope that competition in France, but I think it's the same situation all over Europe, could shift not only to a price competition, but also to a quality competition, and thus incentivizing operator to invest. Actually, the present proposal from the Commission is not for or against this, but I regret a little bit that this idea of regulating with data could be more present in the proposal, maybe not through legislative proposal, but just assuming that it is an interesting strategic development. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Soriano, I'm sure we'll hear more about that, if I had to take a guess, in the future conferences. Mr. Destrel, Alexander, do you want to give us your perspective? I guess you'll be focusing a bit on services and that element of the proposal.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you very much for the invitation. Yeah, I have two main points as an introduction, and then maybe if we can discuss the services a bit longer, I can do it. On network, I think the proposal is going really in the right direction. I think the industrial policy priorities that have been set up with the Gigabit Society, I mean, I think everybody has made the case for it, so I think it's good. Also, clearly, as it has been said here by Pilar, I mean, it creates more flexibility, so regulator will have more tools in the toolbox to adapt to the national circumstances. But that means also, in terms of institutional design, this flexibility which is given in the law, in terms of institutional design, it means that we really need good institutions. More than before, I think we need good regulator, good national regulator, because there is more flexibility in the law. And so the issue of incentive to regulate well is as fundamental, I think, that the incentive to invest, you know, and we really should think that through. So what does it mean at the national level? As Fatima was saying, we need to have regulators which have resources. Now, of course, it's difficult in a time where the public budget have to be cut, and so it's difficult to make the case, but clearly I think it's a good investment case to invest into the regulator, given the importance of the digital into the economy and the society at large. So I think it's a good investment from an investment perspective, if you think like that, although the states do not always think like that. And also an independent regulator, because as it has been said, we need stability in that sector, because we need investment needs stability, and that is why I think a regulator needs this independence to create this stability in face of investors. So I think that's very important that this message come through. I think this is in the code, but with the different movement we see in the society, probably it's not sure that it will remain as such. So I think it's very important to make the case for resource and independence. Now, coming then to the European coordination, and that was related to the different questions that have been raised here, I think, yes, BEREC is a success. But that do not mean that things should not change, because the law has changed, because the law creates more flexibility. I think we need more harmonization mechanism than today, because if you want, there is less harmonization mechanism within the law. You see? So I think, yes, BEREC is a success, but I don't think this is an argument to say we should do nothing here for the future. And I think we really need to have a good authority which allows this discussion, as the Director General was saying, this discussion between regulators to pick the best solution. Because clearly, I mean, and that's the beauty of Europe, we have to experiment things, but at some point we have to say, okay, this is the best route, given the circumstances, and we have to have an authority which allows that kind of picking the best routes, you see. So I think it's very important that BEREC is strengthened as the Commission is proposing. Now, coming to the services, there I think, and maybe in the code it's not sufficiently distinguished, but really when we talk about digital services, there is two categories of services. There is the internet access services, which is really the door to the digital society, and that type of services needs to be regulated, I think, heavily, and it is, I mean, heavily, I mean, it needs to be regulated well, given the importance it has for the society and for the economy. And so, I mean, we have the open internet regulation already, so which is quite a lot of obligation already, and the strengthening of consumer protection, or the specific consumer protection that the code has for internet access services, I think is justified given the importance of that services. Also, it's good that universal service is pushing universal access for everyone, where I think there maybe something is missing or is not ambitious enough, is that we are talking about access to a fixed connection. While what is very important, it has been said by the minister, it has been said by several speakers before me, is Wi-Fi. That is, in an app society, that is what really is important, it's Wi-Fi. And so maybe we should think of universal service as Wi-Fi. There is this specific initiative that the Commission has proposed, Wi-Fi for Europe, and I think that is very, very welcome. But maybe we could have a more modern concept of universal service in terms of Wi-Fi. Now, coming then to the other services, next to the Internet access services, all the other services which are going on Internet, I think there, the specificity of the digital communication services is not that big or is less than before. Before, clearly, you had a telecommunication services, and that was very important. Now you have a lot of way to communicate. I mean, you can communicate with your phone, you can communicate with WhatsApp, Skype, or even with Facebook, and so on. So I don't see what is so particular, except when there is a number, and that is, of course, linked to the numbering element, but I don't see what is so particular in the some digital communication services which are justifying, or which is justifying, a kind of sector-specific consumer protection as proposed in the code. We have in the code some obligation of transparency, we have in the code some obligation of contract and so on, and I don't see why those kind of services are so, and again, I'm not talking about the Internet access services, which is the door to the digital society, which is different. But for the others, I don't see why we need this kind of sector-specific consumer protection. There, I think maybe the code is going a little bit too far. Now, having said that, I think also in terms of this consumer protection that the code is proposing for the services, maybe what also I miss is the dialogue, the use of technology as a way to protect consumer. In the privacy regulation, there is now this principle of privacy by design. So you use technology to protect privacy. I am thinking myself, and I don't have a specific answer, but I think that it could be a good reflection, is couldn't we have a kind of consumer protection by design, or think through better how technology allows a more efficient consumer protection? Okay, that's in terms of an introduction what I wanted to say.
Lots of food for thought there, and I think widening the perspective very nicely, Mr. Distriel. Thanks for that. And we'll get back to all those things later, I promise. Now, Tony, you have applied your incisive mind to all the pages of text that we're all struggling with, I'm sure. Do you want to offer some early thoughts?
Yeah, so I suppose, like everybody else, I'd like to thank ANACOM for inviting me here, particularly Fatima Barras. And I suppose I've been a long-time advocate of the model of regulation, fixed regulation in particular, that's been deployed in Portugal. And I think it has, over time, proven to have gotten very good results. And Pilar mentioned it as well. We've seen the same thing in the Spanish market, where the Spanish regulator adopted a very similar model, frankly, and the French, to a large extent, where I suppose access regulation is driven first and foremost by infrastructure-based competition, and only where that doesn't work are other forms of competition considered. I suppose I feel bad mentioning it, but a lot of that regulation was done in opposition to the European acquis at the time. So Europe sought to use the Article 7 process, in fact, to try and have a more service-based model of competition. And so we have seen, I suppose, in some ways, the advantages of harmonization, and I agree, I think there's a lot of positive aspects to harmonization at a European level. But I think we also have to be conscious of the specificities of countries, and perhaps not even the specificities of countries, but certainly in the early parts of development, we need to be a little bit careful, perhaps, that we don't rush to a solution when we don't know what the right answer is. Because, in fact, it turned out that the right answer perhaps was maybe a little bit different than what was thought at a European level initially. Now, in terms of the proposals, I'd have to say, generally, I think the proposals are very good. I'd agree with something Roberto said, which is that they have received, I think, remarkably broad-based support. And I think that reflects, a wide consultation process and also the coherence of the proposals. And I'm going to repeat a little what the others have said, but, if I look at the 5G, the spectrum proposals, and the 5G vision that's been set out, that can only be achieved if we have fibre in the backhaul network. And we've spoken about 100 megabit and gigabit connectivity. I mean, the thing that strikes me is there is this definition for very high capacity connectivity, which is fibre to the home or fibre to the building or its equivalents. And I think that's important because we do need that kind of connectivity if we're going to have a 5G deployment that works and that makes sense, and if we're going to achieve the Gigabit Society. So maybe just on the fixed access side, which I think is the most important part of the proposals, or at least it is from my perspective. I think it does represent a shift in policy. And, you know, as I said, it starts with a geographic split. You then look at your urban areas, see where infrastructure-based competition will be feasible. You use passive remedies in the rural areas, low density, high cost. You look at other models, and things like, well, they're both separation models really. So co-investment or wholesale-only models of corporate structure and public finance and so on will be used in these rural areas. And I think that's appropriate. I mean, I suppose most of this audience will say, but isn't that what we've been doing for years? And the answer is yes. And France and Spain. In fact, I don't know if that was a deliberate selection policy, but, and I think Europe has learned from that. And I think that's very positive, and I think it goes in the right direction. I think I would have some concerns though, which would be, firstly, around leakage. So I think it would be unfortunate if we saw remedies which were aimed at the urban area. So, emphasis on passive access being deployed in rural areas where you're not going to get competitive deployments. I think that would lead to bad outcomes. But equally, I think if we look at rural areas and we look at separation remedies, which would normally undermine infrastructure-based competition, I think if we saw those leaking into urban areas, I think that would be, quite a negative outcome as well. And it's interesting because we're impending notification, I guess, from the UK on functional separation, which is not limited to rural areas, but is really across the whole territory. And I think this perhaps is one of a number of sort of decisions that the Commission have to make in the short term, where the new policy is not yet in place, but I think it sends important signals. And I think, again, it goes back to something Roberto mentioned earlier on investment and the need for clarity and certainty for investors. And there I think, we need to be very consistent, and the flexibility that is in the framework, or in the code rather, risks, creating uncertainty unless it's applied consistently and in a bright line kind of fashion. And so, I mean, I saw the recent 7A letter on 3A and 3B in Portugal. And, I don't know the details of the thing. I'm sure it's probably perfectly correct. But we need to be careful that we understand what the bigger picture message we're sending is. Because, if you're looking at the world from 10,000 feet, if you're in the C-suite and you're taking investment decisions, well then, you need to feel that I understand what the likely outcomes in a given market will be. And I need to understand what those outcomes are likely to be over time. And so I think, it's important that we get a consistency between policy and implementation. And so I suppose to your point, Alex, the institutional design is going to be critically important. Yeah. So I'll leave it there.
Very good. I think that was an excellent run-through of, of the breadth, really, of the proposal. I think Roberto will appreciate that. I really enjoyed the questions in the first round, so if you have any questions, do prime them, and we have some microphones going around. But first, I'll just look at two themes, I think, which I want to put to the panel. One has to do maybe with the point that Tony raised now, which is about incentives to invest. And I think a perception, at least that's doing the round in Brussels, is that this is very much a regulation focused on fibre and fibre to the home, which is causing conference organizers in Brussels to get dollar signs in their eyes. But I just want to run through the panel, and just on your first reading, it's not a formal opinion, I know, but on the first reading of what's being proposed by the Commission, do you agree that it's a fibre-to-the-home oriented proposal, and is this the right way to go, if you disagree or agree? Sebastian, do you want to do the round that way, and then we'll go to Pilar?
Well, I have to read the text with much attention. Actually, I'm hearing the same rumor in Brussels. And, well, I guess at some extent, if you want to assume a gigabit society strategy, you have to put things on the table about what kind of service you want. And if you go to the definition of a certain quality of service, a certain bandwidth, a certain latency, etc., etc., at some point you will be more or less defining technology. And I think that it is not being against the technology neutrality principle to define a high level of ambition.
What I hear a lot is from cable operators in particular being upset that this is not a, what I hear is from cable operators saying that if you focus on fibre, you don't get cable into the picture. But I guess what you're saying is that as long as you set the specifications right, it can still be technology neutral while still having something in mind that's going towards something. Pilar, I mean, you've been in this discussion about fibre for as long as, as the rest of us. Do you feel on the first reading of the text that it is fibre-oriented, or is that a misconception, or how does it look?
I think, well, in the same line that Sebastian expressed his opinion, I think, well, it is dependent on the aim, the goals you have. And then you want to deliver something, then you have to go for the better proof technology in bringing that, no? So in that sense, you have to keep neutrality, be technology neutral, but in one way or another, you are, let's say, okay, this is what it seems to work in the market as the best in terms of getting the Gigabit Society, for example. That doesn't mean that it's shared by everyone. It depends on the model you have in the countries you are, not only in your country, but the country you are. So it's not going to be absolutely peaceful debate in Parliament, and I guess it was not when the Commission launched the public consultation and have the subsequent meetings with different stakeholders. So, and then we'll see how is the final decision, some integration in some way. I mean, at the end, we have to find a way in which, without losing the main path, try to include and to integrate other voices, you know.
I think I want to bring Alexandra, even though you focused on services, but I want to bring you into this as well. Do you agree with this? I think we're hearing a common message here that it is quite technology neutral, but setting a very high bar for the connectivity. Do you agree? And also, while I have you on the line, I'm going to run this back as well. The question seems to be about the last slice of the population where we're not going to get super fast broadband rolled out by the market. I think it was raised in the previous questions. You know, what happens to the people that are not going to have an operator roll out fibre to the home or super fast cable networks or whatever to the door? How do you propose, or do you feel that the Commission proposal addresses that last slice of the population in the correct way?
Yeah, so I think the real question is, do we agree with the goal or not? I mean, now the question of fibre or not, I think to me is a secondary issue. I mean, and that's where really the debate should be, and I hope that's where the debate will be, and not on is it fibre or cable or not. Now, do we want to have very ambitious objective for a connectivity society or not? Okay? Now, if we say yes, I mean, and then there is a debate to have, yeah, because some people say we should not force the market, we should let the market to go on its own pace, and others say, no, it's the role of the politician, not even the regulator, the politician, to set a very ambitious objective. And I think that's a democratic debate that should happen in the Parliament and in the Council. Now, if then they conclude that, yes, we want to be very ambitious on our objective, and it's happened that only fiber can deliver that technology, so be it. I mean, but I think that we have to have the right debate, and I am afraid that in that kind of circumstances that you mentioned in Brussels, we don't have the right debate. You know, we don't have to start with the principle, we have to start with the objective we want to achieve. Now, on your question of the last slides of the population, which is of course very, very important, because the risk is that those people will be left behind. And one of the big issues today, and we were discussing that over lunch, is that we have to be sure that everyone is on board of that society. What is feeling populism now today, it's clearly that some people are left behind. So I think this is politically a very fundamental point. You know. And I think, yes, what the Commission is proposing there with this different model of access and with this differentiation, depending on which kind of zone you are, like Tony was explaining, is going in the right direction. Yes, I think so. Also, the Commission is incentivizing the private investment, but clearly it will not be enough, and therefore we would need public investment. Now, what would be very important is that we have a consistency between what we have in the code and what we have in the state aid control. Okay? Now, I don't see any strong inconsistency today, but I think it would be very important, and I didn't do the exercise myself, and maybe the Commission has done it, but that the guidelines on state aid are completely aligned with this new approach we have in the code. And I'm not sure that it's totally the case. I'm not sure it's not the case, so I would need to do the exercise myself. But I think that is very important if we want to cover this last part of the population.
Pilar, do you feel that the proposal addresses this last slice of the population? I guess for politicians is very important.
I'm sorry, can you repeat, please?
Do you feel that the communication code addresses this last, say, 5% of the population, that even the successful Spanish model won't get the private operators to invest?
Well, I think in terms of aim, it's clear. I mean, the statement of the Commission in that context, in the text, it is exactly for everyone, everywhere. So everyone, everywhere means that you have to, and the goal of the 100 megabytes for 2025 is for everyone, everywhere. Then you have the goal of the gigabytes for more the social and economic drivers, being research centers, universities, public administration, and so on and so forth. But this is inclusive in that sense, no?
So as long as the politicians keep that goal in mind, we'll have the legislation that matches.
Clear. I mean, be for sure the Parliament will go
Always.
on that line. Could be less, could be less.
Tony, you want to dive in?
No, I was going to say, I mean, your own country, you know, if I look at Sweden, they're almost building from the most remote areas back into the cities, and they've used a range of different tools. I'm not sure I'd advocate them, but including sort of tax breaks, et cetera, and it has allowed them, you know, to achieve an amazing level of connectivity in very rural and very challenging areas. So there are different models that can be used, I think, you know, but I don't think we can start with the ambition to have a digital divide. I don't think that's the Commission's intention either. But
I think you're absolutely right there. Sebastian, do you want to dive in on that, or do you want to move on to services? I think before we're wrapping up soon, so don't worry. But on the service part, I think Alexandra mentioned a very important distinction between the internet access and the services that ride on top. And I think you've been very active as well in BEREC and you yourself in net neutrality and the leveling playing field.
Assumed is to be in a problem-solving approach. And I think this is key. I mean, what's the question regarding the end user? Well, when I see people using phone services, I think that they are expecting something. Because we are using phone services from one century, or for decades, let's say. And when you take your phone, you expect some quality of service, you expect to reach everybody, and you expect in emergency situations to can reach some emergency services. So there is, you know, an experience that is expected when you use a phone service. And I think we have to do with this. So the idea of putting a limited and very targeted level of guarantee on OTT communication services to make sure that end users are not disappointed, surprised by these new alternative phone services, it seems, I mean, pragmatic. The broader question is about the internet players. And we have been hearing very much about level playing fields. And I think that at some extent this is some kind of trap, you know, for regulators, because it is not a goal in itself to make sure that you know, people are regulated because others are. I think it's not a good approach. And I think the proposal from the Commission avoids this trap. The broader question is these very big tech companies like Google or Apple or Facebook, there are today some kind of gatekeepers for the digital economy. If you are an SME and you want to launch an expert online website service, you have to put your advertising on Google AdWords. If you are a startup, you want to develop an application, you have to be referenced by the App Store and the Google Marketplace also. And what is the security attached to this? I mean, if these big tech companies don't accept you or threw you away from one day to the other without clear explanation, without transparency rules, what is the level playing field of European normal, I mean, companies that want to go into the digital economy? I think there is a real level playing field issue here, because the new marketplace of the whole economy is the digital place. And you have these gatekeepers. But let's be honest, this is not today, at least in the institutional framework, the work of BEREC.
Maybe we'll be back in another 6 years, and it will be. Any questions from the floor? We have one there. Okay, just one question for Pilar before we go to the questions, but if we can pass the mic. Pilar, this question of regulating international phone calls has somehow resurfaced in the Parliament. Is this a serious thing? Is the Parliament going to start putting price caps on international calls?
Well, we'll see. We'll see. I have to remind that it was in the proposal of the Commission on the TSM, on the initial proposal. That was the Parliament decided not to, to follow with this, to take it finally, just because we have to focus on the roaming part of the story. We couldn't manage at the same time try to get abolition of roaming and at the same time to introduce legislation of this market of the international calls. But I must say that it is there. Now we'll see what, how the debate is going on. And, well, it's something that is there. So we'll see. See, finally will be in the proposal.
We'll keep an eye on your reports. So we have a question. If you can just say who you are and who your question is for. Yep.
So, Elder Vasconcelos from ANACOM. Actually, I have two questions, but one is very quick. It's a clarification question to Sebastián Soriano regarding this regulating the data that you announced here. Well, it's clear that this is an interesting issue to have more data available for consumers to choose between operators. My concern is the following. So how can you ensure the consumers that the data they are comparing is indeed comparable? So how are you sure that the coverage that the operators are sending to the antitrust authorities follow the same model, the same assumptions, and so on? I suppose you are taking care of that. It was not clear for me from the presentation because you were extremely quick on that. So this is actually a clarification question. The second question is a broader question. It's actually for the panel, and regards the last topic that you are addressing here, OTTs. Well, from an economics perspective, for me it's clear. Whether the OTTs should be within the same market or not, everything depends on demand substitutability. Whether they are offering, if they are offering substitute services, whatever the technology is being used for that, they should belong to the same market and they should abide by the same rules. Okay? What we have been following so far is actually that we don't have a level playing field. This is at least clear for me. And what you are observing over the years is that traditional players sliding down and new players popping up, and the distribution of value within the value chain, it's clear and even, to say the least. So how will we be sure that if the situation continues like that, the investment will be possible in sustainable terms by the traditional operators? So should regulators play a role on this issue or not? That's the more broader question. Thank you.
Very good. Sebastian, do you want to clarify on the data?
Yeah, that's a very important question. The quality of data, let's say. When I try to express this new regulatory approach by the expression regulating with data, there is still a regulator. And the regulator is still here to give the right direction of the market. And presently the right direction is, guys, we want you to invest. And then the regulator makes sure that the right data is on the table. It is not only a question of transparency. It is a question of crowd regulation. It is a question of delegating to end user some parts of the regulatory role, which mean to give the good incentives to operators. So the nature of the data that are on the table are key. So for instance, if I give example of what we are doing at ARCEP, we have a new disposal from the digital law that allow us to put in open data data from our 4 mobile operators in terms of coverage. So now we are taking a decision that defines precisely what kinds of electromagnetic field value the different operators have to simulate on their network to give us the relevant information, so that we are combining information that are comparable. That is the first question. So this is about our unbundling of the data strategy. Another strategy that we have is a strategy of partnership with people that are publishing data. Today there are, it's the same case in Portugal, there are mobile applications in France when you can download the application and then you can test your mobile connectivity. And so you have the information for you, so you're happy, but what is very important is that the information is gathered by a platform, and thanks to that information, a kind of map can be published through crowdsourcing information. And so what we are doing actually is that we launched a call for partnership to all these kind of people. We are proposing them to work with us. It's not mandatory. If they accept to work with us, then they will have to show us how they work. And then we can make sure that the information is relevant and is impartial. And the counterpart of this work is that if we agree with if we give our approbation to the ways the application works, then the supplier of the application can publicly evoke the fact that we have given some kind of stamps of kind of label. So it's a kind of win-win program that we are trying. It's a try. We are still in process trying to put in place.
Very good, thanks. I think that clarified. So if I can just boil down the other question, which was about should we basically have a substitutability test for the OTT? Anyone want to weigh in on that? Tony?
Well, sorry, I think in respect to the OTTs, we need to be a little bit careful that we're cognizant of the different economics and the different technology that play. So for instance, if you take emergency services, if I've got my laptop open, I use a VPN. That VPN has me located as soon as I log on in Brussels. And if I make an emergency call through my laptop over Viber or FaceTime or whatever, it's going to say, send send an ambulance or whatever to a location in Brussels, not to where I am here in Lisbon. So I think we need to be cognizant of that. Also, I mean, on the other side of that, if you take your SIM card out of your phone, your network operator can still handle an emergency call. So I think the technology is quite different. I'm a bit concerned actually about the interoperability provision that's in place. It's only supposedly a security or a backup provision, but I think it's something that we should be worried about, a bit like a gun on the table in a Chekhov play. It's going to get used. And if I look at the model, the economic model, it's about competition for the market, not competition in the market. So Fiber comes in, competes with Skype, FaceTime comes in, competes with Skype, not to compete for Skype customers, but to create a new market. And I think the danger is, you know, if we enforce interoperability between services, we run the risk of damaging innovation, and particularly, you know, startups, because they'll have to interoperate from the beginning. So I think that's...
yeah. Alexander, do you want to... And then I'm conscious you need some coffee as well, so I'm not going to take too long. Alexander.
Yeah, on the last point, I agree with Tony. I think it would be very dangerous to signal that an interoperability may be imposed. And the condition which are now in the Article 59 of the Code seems to me not precise enough for the Commission to trigger this interoperability, which will completely change the business model of those industries. So I think we have to be very, very careful to the signal which is given to the investor of tomorrow and today in the platform economy. But on the more general point on OTT and platform, I think all those discussions of substitutabilities and so on call for having as much as possible of regulation into the general consumer protection regulation and as little as possible into the sector-specific consumer protection. And I think the code is still proposing too many things into the sector-specific. Now, having said that, I think the general consumer protection should be fundamentally revisited, because I think it doesn't work today for two reasons. First is because I think the rules are not smart enough, and second, because the enforcers are not strong enough. And I am very happy that the Commission has launched this review of the general consumer protection, but I think we need to improve the rule in two directions. The first is in taking better into account the bias of the consumer. There is a lot of research now, and DG Just is very aware of that, about behavioral economics and so on, and the way you disclose information. The fact is, many of us, we receive the term of reference, we don't read it, we accept it, and we go on. And we think we are protected, and we are protected according to EU law, and we are not. I mean, this is a completely stupid rule. So I think that needs to be changed with less information at the right moment. I think, on the other hand, the rule we have for roaming, where you cross the border and you receive a short information but useful information, that is the thing, that's the direction where we have to go. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to talk better with psychologists when you devise the rule. The second thing is, as I was saying, talk more with computer scientists. Tomorrow, who will decide which kind of telecom company, energy company you will have? Not you. It will be your artificial intelligence algorithm, So the important thing is that this algorithm receives the right information and information it can process. So those are, I think, the interesting questions. So we need to fundamentally revisit the general consumer protection, and that is the way forward, not to add some small rules in the code and then decide, is it applicable to OTT, yes or no, is it susceptible? I think that's not the right approach. But again.
And there we go. The short message is always better received than a long one. So we had one more earmark question, then we're going to break for coffee. But keep it short. Tell us who it's for and who you are. Thanks.
Two short questions. The first one is related to the presentation of Mr. Soriano and the unbundling of data. ANACOM has been unbundling data since the year 2000. Of course, we did not call that unbundling the data. We were more modest, called it measurement of quality of service. But we were expecting to promote competition, investment-based competition, to improve the quality of service. There were two problems. The first were the results of the measurements were usually that in CTA, operator 1 is the best one. In CTB, operator 2 is the best one. In Highway 1, operator A is the best one. In Highway 2, so there was something for every operator. And so, in a sense, everyone was comfortable. And there were no obvious incentives for investment. Second problem is the following. When there there is, when one of the operators has a ranking, has a measurement much worse than the others, there's they question the technical procedure, and then there is litigation. How are you considering the possibility of litigation and the risk of litigation in your case, taking into account also that you are using some type of crowdsourcing for your data? Second one relates to the institutional problem and to the institutional design. For a national regulator of a small country like ours, it's comfortable to deal with the European Commission. We understand the concept of the public interest of the European Commission. We understand the sources of legitimacy of the European Commission. Unfortunately, that is not the case with BEREC. It's not obvious the source of legitimacy of BEREC. And BEREC is accountable to whom in the end? I think that with the role considered by BEREC, don't you think that something more must be said in the future institutional design about BEREC concerning legitimacy and accountability? Thank you.
Mr. Soriano, do you want to clarify the...
Yeah, concerning the question of data, I propose to have a bilateral exchange. And just let me give a word about BEREC. I would like first to thank very much Mrs. Pilar del Castillo, because she is a good mother. Because what is the problem of BEREC? Let's be honest. The problem of BEREC is that it's complex. It's weird. It's unusual. It's ugly. You know, it's a little bit like there is an advertising campaign in France about ugly vegetables. You know, from decades, supermarkets are selecting very, very beautiful vegetables and fruits. But what we know now is that it's very bad for the planet. And now we have to take new habits to eat ugly vegetables. And I think that what I really appreciate with Mrs. del Castillo is that as a mother of BEREC, she doesn't consider BEREC as ugly. She's just looking at what BEREC is doing at school. How nice is BEREC? And BEREC is really doing a good job, as you mentioned. Thank you very much for that.
Pilar, please. Yes.
Well, one of the problems with this being mother of BEREC is that mothers never are objective with the sons. So one of the problems is that you have the handicap of to what extent you see, you know, that, well, this, in this case, BEREC is really doing so well, as you said. No, I think from time to time, and this story starts, let's say now, almost 7 years ago, and in 7 years, things has changed dramatically in this digital world. There is a need to at least to think about some of the, I will not, wouldn't throw out the proposal from the Commission, all of them. Some of them I don't think are the right ones. It could be too much intervening, you know, on BEREC, and then the independence of BEREC should be warranted. I mean, in that sense. But having said that, there is a problem that Roberto Viola said, and you in the last question said as well, in terms of accountability. You know, in that case, you have responsibility. You have to have some kind of way of accountability, and maybe it's the time to rethink some aspect without damaging the independence of BEREC and the basic, you know, the basic line on which BEREC has born and developed these years was, as I said, it is, and I think I'm really objective on that, a successful story.
There you go. And I think it's always polite to leave the Parliament with the last word. So on that note, I'd like to thank the panel. I'll leave you to get some coffee. We ate into the coffee break a little bit, and I think we started a bit late, but I think 10, 15 minutes? Yeah, it's okay. Okay, we're in Portugal. Don't worry about it. Grab some coffee. I'll see you back in a bit. Thank you all very much, and I'd like to thank the panel the usual way.